Welcome to the Partial Historians.
We explore all the details of ancient Rome.
Everything from political scandals, the love affairs, the battles waged, and when citizens turn against each other. I'm Dr. Rad.
And I'm Dr. G. We consider Rome as the Romans saw it, by reading different authors from the ancient past and comparing their stories.
Join us as we trace the journey of Rome from the founding of the city. Welcome to the partial recap for the 400s BCE.
I'm Dr. G.
And I'm Dr. Rad.
And this is our highlights edition of the 400s in Rome. We'll take you through from 409 to 400 in an epitome of our normal episodes.
It's perfect for those mornings when you don't want some lengthy rhetoric with your coffee. But please be warned, the Roman world was a violent one.
Get ready for a re-cappuccino.
BCE. In 409 BCE, the consuls were Gnaeus Cornelius Cossus and Lucius Furius Medulinus. The plebeians were so upset that they could not elect their champion Menenius as military tribune with consular power. Capitalizing on that, the tribunes of the plebs started applying some pressure. Do something about the situation, people, or we give up. There were a staggering number of tribunes from the legendary Achillii family this year, and the plebs did always take them especially seriously. #heroes of the underrepresented. Finally, 3 plebs were elected to the quaestorship instead. This cheered them up immensely, as it was the first time a plebeian had been chosen for this office. Amazeballs. The patricians naturally fell apart immediately. When they allowed plebs to be elected to the quaestorship, they didn't really think it would happen. It was too ridiculous. A pleb in office? A pleb chosen over a patrician? This was a worrying sign that the world was ending. To make matters worse, the Achillii started pushing for elections for military tribunes with consular power in 408. We see what you are scheming, you troublesome tribunes. You want a pleb to hold imperium. Don't make us sick. As the patricians and plebeians battled it out once more for consuls versus military tribunes, the Aequians and the Volscians started attacking the territory of Roman allies. The consuls attempted to hold a levy to raise an army, but the Achillii refused to let the levy proceed until they got what they wanted: elections for military tribunes. As the patricians and plebeians entered yet another staring contest, news arrived that the citadel of Carventum had been lost to the enemy. Still, the tribunes refused to allow the levy to proceed. Military success be damned. This was not a popular move, but it worked. The patricians were forced to agree that there would be no consuls in 408, but only on the condition that none of the current tribunes of the plebs could serve again or be elected as military tribune. They couldn't kill the Achillii, but they could kill their career prospects. With all that unpleasantness behind them, the Romans could now march off to Carventum and win back that citadel. They did not quite pull that off, so instead, they captured Verrugo from the Volscians and contented themselves with lots of lovely booty.
408 BCE. So in 408, the military tribunes with consular power were Gaius Julius Ullus, Publius Cornelius Cossus, and Gaius Servilius Ahala. In spite of the drama in 409, only patricians were elected to serve as the chief magistrates. Who would have thought? The patricians had pulled some shady tricks in the election, but it worked. No plebs were chosen, and they could breathe a sigh of relief. The Antiates, Volscians, and Aequians decided to band together and take on the Romans in this year. The Romans were used to taking on 2 enemies at a time, but 3? Time for a dictator. Two of the military tribunes were pressed to see their chance for glory and command slip right through their fingers. Julius and Cornelius complained so much that high-ranking senators had to tell them to build a bridge and get over it. Only Ahala proved himself worthy of office, as he was willing to do whatever was best for Rome, not himself. Aww. This impressed the pants off everyone, including the new dictator, Publius Cornelius Rutilius Cossus, so he chose Ahala to serve as his deputy. That's what happens when you're a team player. The Romans could now focus on what they do best, winning. They easily trampled their enemies, perhaps capturing some prisoners and a fortress. Back at home, the patricians decided to use the same dodgy election tactics to make sure that no plebs were chosen to serve as military tribunes with consular power in 407. And it worked. Who says you have to reinvent the wheel? The wheel is fine.
(407 BCE). In 407 BCE, the military tribunes with consular power were Lucius Furius Megellinus, Caius Valerius Petitus Volusus, Numerius Fabius Vibulanus, and Gaius Suilius Ahala. It may have been in this year that the treaty between the Romans and Veii ran out. Hope that doesn't have any terrible consequences. The recently recaptured town or fortress of Verugo was lost back to the Volscians. Again. Losing the territory was bitter, but the slaughter of the Roman garrison made the situation even worse. And it all could have been avoided if the Romans had just sent reinforcements instead of waiting for their nails to dry.
(406 BCE). In 406, the military tribunes with consular power were Publius Cornelius Rutilius Cossus, Gnaeus Cornelius Cossus, Numerius, or Gnaeus, Fabius Ambustus, and Lucius Valerius Petitus. 406 BCE was a big year for the ancient Romans, as it was apparently the year that their relationship with the Etruscan city of Veii fell apart for the third time. It's like Ross and Rachel all over again. Will these two crazy kids stop trying to kill each other and just admit that they are perfect for each other? No. The senators of Veii make it very clear that they prefer the killing option. The Romans were so offended that war was the only response. Unfortunately, the young men in the city were kind of all warred out. The Romans had finally done it. They'd had enough of fighting. Who even knew that was possible? The tribune of the plebs seized on this unhappiness to create some fantastic propaganda about how awful the patricians were. They used war to keep the people too distracted to fight for their own rights. Bastards! The patricians knew they were in trouble when some veterans started taking their tunics off and showing their wounds. How much more blood do you want, you elite vampires? Can't you see they've already given all they have? Instead, the military tribunes decided to head off against the Volscians. Smart to wrap one conflict up before starting another. 3 of the military tribunes decided to divide and conquer. They take on Antium, Etore, and Unxor. This was pushing things further south than the Romans had ever gone before. Through some very clever distractions, Fabius managed to capture Unxor, which meant lots of plunder for all. Such generosity made the plebeians teary. Thanks for letting us profit from this death and destruction, guys. The patricians followed this up with a very unexpected bonus. Military pay. Yep, that's now a thing, everyone. If there was ever a moment when the plebeians had their minds blown, it was now. Explosion. The plebeians were now fully Team Patrician. It's not just the pay, guys. It's the fact that you anticipated our needs. I mean, we didn't even have to ask. The only people who were not popping the champagne were the tribune of the plebs. The plebeian tribunes tried to slap some sense into the people. Hello, where is all the money for this going to come from? And why is it happening now? What are the patricians really planning? Unwilling to lose their good publicity, the patricians made very public donations to the military pay fund, and anyone who could afford it started following their example. The plebeians did not need to see any more. Where could they sign up? War couldn't come soon enough. It was the only way to show how much they just loved Rome and loved the patricians. Nobody has better leaders. Where else do you get paid to risk your life and limbs? The patricians suddenly remembered that they actually would like an army to go and fight Veii. Isn't that just a coincidence? Or did it happen the other way around? The war, then the pay. By the close of the year, the Romans were ready to avenge the insult from Veii. Nobody is rude to the Romans and gets away with it. Time to teach the Etruscans some manners.
405 BCE. In 405 BCE, the military tribunes with consular power were Titus Quinctius Capitolinus, Quintus Quinctius Cincinnatus, Caius Iulius Iulus, Aulus Manlius, Lucius Furius Megellinus, and Manius Aemilius Mamercus. The siege of Veii technically began in this year, although the Romans did not make much progress because the Roman army had to leave and deal with those pesky Volscians. Meanwhile, the Etruscans were having one of their gatherings at the shrine of Voltumna and debating whether they should support Veii in the upcoming struggle with the Romans.
BCE. In 404, the military tribunes with consular power were Gaius Valerius Potitus, Manius Sergius Fidenas, Publius Cornelius Magulensis, Gnaeus Cornelius Cossus, and Gaius/Caeso Fabius Ambustus, and Spurius Nautius Rutulus. The Romans won various battles with the Volscians in this year, but the most significant victory was at the town of Artena. The Romans managed to capture the city, except for the citadel. Some Volscian warriors had taken refuge there, and the Romans could just not break through. What's a soldier to do? The Romans were pouting over this predicament when a Volscian slave decided to betray his masters and show the Romans a secret way into the citadel. The Romans captured that annoying citadel and demolished the town. The slave was freed and given the name of Servius Romanus, plus some property for his troubles. Now the Romans could really focus on Veii.
BCE. In 403 BCE, the military tribunes with consular power were Aemilius Mamercinus or Mamercus, Lucius Valerius Potitus, Appius Claudius Crassus, Marcus Quintilius Varus, Lucius Julius Iulus, Marcus Furius Fusus, Marcus Postumius, Marcus Furius Camillus, and Marcus Postumius Albinus Regilensis. Rome and Veii continued to be on the warpath this year, only this time they both seemed to understand that this would be a duel to the death. It would be victory or utter destruction. That might have something to do with the extraordinary number of military tribunes that Rome elected. The people of Veii actually weren't that interested in more campaigning and decided to elect a king. Unfortunately, their king was well known as a douchebag extraordinaire, and so the rest of the Etruscan cities said, "You're on your own, Veii. Sorry about it." The Romans were busily preparing their siege, and everyone noticed that winter quarters were being set up so that the siege could last as long as it needed to. This was a new development, and not everyone was terribly happy about it. The tribunes of the plebs started stirring up trouble in the city, as they tend to do, pointing out that this was exactly what they had suspected when military pay was suddenly introduced a few years ago. Told you so. I told you so. The patricians were completely out of line. They expected the soldiers to serve endlessly with no work-life balance. Why not just make them slaves and be done with it? This was a new low, and they had seen some real scallywags in the past. If only the plebeians had elected one of their own to be a military tribune, maybe they wouldn't be in this mess. The military tribunes had anticipated that someone might start getting lippy, so they had left behind Appius Claudius from the most patrician gens on the block to deal with any rabble-rousers. Appius Claudius summoned all his rhetorical powers to savagely attack the tribunes of the plebs. They were clearly just creating strife so that they could justify their job. If there were no tribunes, the relationship between the plebs and the patricians would be so much more harmonious, because the patricians are the best people on the planet. Unity was what Rome needed. A united Rome would be unstoppable. They would conquer the world. But hey, if people really wanted to insult the soldiers by undoing all their hard work and risk the war moving to Roman territory, that was one way to go. A stupid way to go. And if the people wanted to call the Roman soldiers snowflakes because they can't take a few, well, snowflakes, they could diss their own army and make Rome look like a laughingstock in front of all of their enemies. But Appius didn't believe the Romans really wanted that. They understood that military pay was a totally fair trade for these new circumstances. They had the grit, the determination, and the hatred necessary to pounce now, whilst Veii was vulnerable. Of course they could listen to the tribunes of the plebs and be weak and totally ruin everything. I mean, they're basically traitors who are completely going to undermine the obedience of the army next. After such a barrage of arguments, some of the people were starting to think Appius Claudius was talking sense, but the plebs were divided. At that moment, word reached Rome of a major setback in the siege at Veii, which completely changed everything. The patricians and the plebeians started to unite, and more of the plebs found themselves agreeing with what Appius Claudius had said. Equestrian men donated their service and that of their own horses to help with the war effort. The senators were overwhelmed, and they were about to get another present. The plebs did not want to be outshone by these equestrians, so they rushed to the Senate House and volunteered to do whatever it took to defeat Veii. Do you want me to kill for you? Please, please ask me to kill for you. The year ended in a total love fest. Tears, joy, flowing on all sides, and awkward embraces between the senators and the plebs. This infusion of fresh meat was just what the campaign needed. The equestrian volunteers were given a money allowance, which was apparently partly financed by some new taxes on unmarried men and orphans. Thanks, censors. Who wouldn't want the rich men on horses to feel the pinch? Definitely best to make the orphans cover the costs.
BCE. In 402, the military tribunes with consular power were Gaius Servilius Ahala, Quintus Servilius Fidenas, Lucius Virginius Tricostus Esquilinus, Quintus Sulpicius Camerinus Cornutus, Aulus Manlius Vulso Capitolinus, and Manius Sergius Fidenas. The Romans were so intensely focused on their war with Veii that they let things slide in Unxor, which they had recently added to their collection of territories. The Roman garrison were given some leave, and whilst they were out picnicking and braiding each other's hair, the locals recaptured their town. Meanwhile, at Veii, the commanders seemed to be more caught up in a competition with each other than in actually conquering their Etruscan rivals. Sounds like the Romans were cooking up a recipe for disaster. Virginius and Sergius clearly had some serious beef with each other. Hey, Livy, where's the backstory on these two? And their rivalry could not have come at a worse time. The Faliscans and the Carpanates decided to join their Etruscan brothers suddenly in their war with Rome. We're sure it was out of the goodness of their hearts, and not because they realized that the Romans would be coming after them if they fell. The Romans already despised the Faliscans, as they had fought against them in the past. How dare they cross them again? However, the surprising union of Etruscan peoples put the Romans on the back foot. Were all of the Etruscans coming after them? More concerningly, Roman forces were now caught between two attacking forces. Sergius was the man on the ground, and he knew the Romans needed some reinforcements from their main camp. But he wasn't going to ask for help. That would mean asking his rival Virginius for aid. Back at the main camp, Virginius heard that the Romans were in distress, but he wasn't going to send help to Sergius, not unless Sergius begged. If you're sensing that this battle did not go Rome's way, you would be correct. Sergius decided to run back to Rome to tattle on Virginius and demand that he be stripped of his command. The Senate were not impressed with this situation and decided to just clean sweep it, get rid of all these tribunes, hold some early elections, and start fresh. Sergius and Verginius started to backpedal furiously. They weren't going to have their military tribunate cut short. The tribune of the plebs weighed in on the issue, threatening the military tribunes with prison if they did not resign early. Ahala, one of the other military tribunes, chimed in, telling the tribune of the plebs that they had no right to send any magistrates to prison. Perhaps it was time for a dictator. Everyone loved Ahala's strong stance. It did the trick. The tribune of the plebs and Sergius and Verginius all backed down, allowing elections to be called early for the following year.
401 BCE. In 401 BCE, the military tribunes with consular power were Lucius Valerius Potitus, Marcus Furius Camillus, Manius Aemilius Mamercinus or Mamercus, Gnaeus Cornelius Cossus, Caeso Fabius Ambustus, and Lucius Julius Vopisci. Rome was on scandal overload in 401 BCE. The first drama was caused by the new military tribunes as they started to levy troops. They needed lots of men with all of the campaigns they were running, battling Veii, Capenna, Falerii, and the Volscians. However, it was not a good look when they started enlisting the young and elderly. But the more men they enlisted, the more money they needed to fund the new military pay system. An attempt was made to introduce a special war tax, and this went down about as well as most new taxes. The plebs were feeling very put upon, and the tribunes of the plebs decided to make the most of this. They stirred up so much angst that the elections of the next tribunes were a bit of a non-event, and there weren't enough plebeian men elected to office. The patricians were keen to undermine this position, and they seem to have leaned on some of the elected tribunes to co-opt candidates that they found acceptable. One of the remaining tribunes, Gnaeus Trebonius, fought hard against this. His ancestor had campaigned in 448 BCE to protect the tribunate from exactly this kind of corruption, and the Lex Trebonia was now being politely ignored. The guilty tribunes who had made a deal with the patricians knew their reputation was in danger. They decided to harness all the negative feeling towards themselves, the tax, the levy, the wars, and channel it into attacking Sergius and Verginius from the previous year. They were those military tribunes who had let their personal hatreds seriously jeopardize the fighting against Veii. Insinuating that they were part of some evil deep state patrician conspiracy to drag out the wars so that the people would not have the time or the energy to push for greater plebeian rights. Hey, Brittany, it's getting toxic in here. It's just as well Sergius and Verginius were totally guilty, as they did not stand much of a chance of being declared innocent. The two douchebags were issued a heavy fine, but the tribunes weren't going to stop there. Why not try to secure land reform and refuse to pay the war tax whilst they were at it? After all, Rome was not exactly vanquishing its enemies. They were mostly just holding their own. Was this really worth a special tax? This had a serious effect on those out in the field. Where was all this pay they had been promised? But in the city itself, all the outrage finally seemed to be paying off. A plebeian was elected to serve as military tribune with consular power in the very next years. It only took 100 years or so to get to this point.
(400 BCE). In 400, the military tribunes with consular power were Publius Licinius Calvus Esquilinus, Publius Manlius Vulso, Lucius Titinius Pansa Sarcus, Publius Maelius Capitolinus, Spurius Furius Medullinus, and Lucius Publilius Vola Philo Volscus. In this year, the Romans recaptured Unxor from the Volscians. Huzzah! The plebeians were in a state of shock to find one of their own serving as military tribune this year. So what made Publius Licinius Calvus so special? Did he buy his way into power? Was it family connections? Or was he just nice? Licinius Calvus seems to have owed his position to the fact that he was completely inoffensive to both classes. The patricians and the plebeians found him quite congenial. With one of the major goals achieved, the tribunes of the plebs could finally relax, put on a Hawaiian shirt, take a holiday. The war tax, which had been needed to fund the pay for the soldiers, was paid as the tribunes no longer fought against it.
And that was the 400s in ancient Rome. Or was it?
So this has been a highlights reel from the ancient sources. And if you want to delve into the complexities of the different evidence for this period, we recommend checking out our narrative episodes. Starting at episode 144, Where in the World is Carventum? And that way you can join us in a deep dive of all of the 400s BCE.
Thanks for tuning in to this partial recap.